Shocking consequences. Riley and his 5 goons lay on the ground, each of their breaths shallow. Their chests barely rose, the sickly sweet smell of burnt flesh permeating off each of them and mixed with singed hair and clothing. The remaining student body currently in the gymnasium looked upon Christopher with both shock and horror. Christopher had told them to stop. He had asked them to leave him alone. Riley had pulled out a weapon. Christopher had acted in self-defense, but people wouldn't likely see it that way. Maybe if he had only gone after Riley, but not his goon squad too. He was in trouble. He was a dead man. Christopher woke up in a cold sweat, his t-shirt and sheets soaked through. He was breathing heavily. The moonlight illuminated the room, shadows depicting monsters that weren't there. If Christopher was being honest, the only true monster was him. Ever since he was a kid, things would happen around him, especially when he gets angry, scared, or upset. Flickering lights, the television, or appliances randomly turn on or off. As he got older, things would actually start to shoot sparks or wiring would fry up. He exploded his game system after he got really frustrated at a difficult fight in zombie hordes when he was 14. 2 years later, Christopher had learned one thing. It was to not feel anything. Probably not the best choice, especially being a 16-year-old kid in a new high school. But it was his best option. If he didn't get overly emotional, he wouldn't hurt anyone. Unfortunately for him, Riley Avers had decided to target him. Christopher didn't know why. Maybe because he was new, maybe because he was quiet, maybe because he was smart. Whatever the reason, Riley was making it really hard for Christopher to keep his calm. Every day, Christopher was terrified he would finally snap and blow a gaping hole straight through Riley's chest. There had already been several close calls, just like when he was a kid. The vending machine broke down when Riley cornered him in the lunchroom demanding money. Exploding fluorescent lights when Riley and his goon squad bombarded him with dodgeballs during gym class. A completely obliterated computer lab after Riley had punched him in the stomach because Christopher said he wouldn't do Riley's computer project for him. No witnesses, of course, so it was Christopher's word against Riley. Christopher rubbed his fingers in a circular motion against his temples. Just the thought of another day with Riley was causing minor electrical sparks to course up and down Christopher's arms. He took a deep, shuddering breath and fell back onto his pillow. He glanced at his alarm clock, a bold red 4 o'clock read across the screen. Christopher made up his mind. He couldn't do this anymore. Someone was going to get hurt. And when that happened, it wouldn't be Christopher who walked away a hero, but a killer. He shut off his alarm and quickly got dressed in a Hex Game t-shirt and blue jeans. Stuffed a spare backpack with some clothes, a couple of books. He would grab some snacks from the kitchen on his way out. He had $50 to his name in cash. It wasn't much, but it would be a start. Christopher took another quick look around his room, then headed out. It was 2 hours later. He was sitting at the bus station that would take him out of town, away from Riley and all his problems. Well, not the ability to blow stuff up with electricity, but at least everything else would be better. He had left a note for his parents on the kitchen counter. Seeing as his phone wasn't blowing up with messages yet, it meant they were still asleep. Hopefully, by the time they realized he was gone, he would already be on the bus a long way from town. "Looks like you were right, Nick. Dumbass is at the bus station," said Riley. Riley's 5 goon squad members laughed. Christopher wanted to cry, not because he was scared, well, not scared of Riley and his pets, but because he was tired and his focus was off. Plus, he was already agitated about running away, even if he didn't have any other choice. It wouldn't take much to push him over the edge to make him lose control. This was bad, so very bad. Riley and his squad circled around the bench that Christopher was sitting at. "Your parents get tired of having a queerdo son and kick you out?" Riley sneered as he shoved Christopher's shoulder. But quickly he jerked his hand back as a strong static shock shot through his hand. Riley cursed as he looked at his hand. Christopher grimaced. He was bisexual, and somehow Riley had found that out. Just one more reason for Riley to target him. Riley, after a pause, looked at Christopher with rage. He made a fist and threw a punch right for Christopher's face. Christopher reflexively threw up his hands. His gift, reacting to his emotional state, blasted outward and into Riley. Riley, a second before his punch connected, was thrown back 20 feet. He landed hard on the ground and was unmoving. His goon squad screamed and ran, none of them wanting to be near Christopher, their voices clambering over each other as they yelled, "Weirdo" and "Freak." Christopher wasn't paying attention to them. He was kneeling over Riley, who was unmoving. Christopher put his head to Riley's chest, no heartbeat or breathing. He desperately grabbed Riley's wrist, no pulse. Christopher cursed. He looked around, but the bus stop was empty, this early in the morning. He thought of calling for help, but then what? They would just find him next to a dead person, a person he killed. He didn't want to go to jail for murder. Christopher desperately looked around for a first aid station or an AED machine, when Christopher realized his gift made him a human AED machine. He placed his hand over Riley's chest. Christopher realized he wasn't sure how much power he should generate, but he figured it had to be less than the initial blast. He took a deep, steadying breath and nothing. Christopher looked at his hands in frustration. He was constantly having to suppress his power, all the time, every second of every day. The first time he wants to use his power, it doesn't work. Christopher laughed as he placed his hand back on Riley's chest. "Work," he cried out. "Oh my God," exclaimed a security guard. It was then Christopher heard the distant wail of sirens getting closer. "No," Christopher said. Tears began to wail in his eyes. "You need to move back now, sir," ordered the security guard. "I can save him," said Christopher. "Step away or I will shoot you," said the security guard. He had a taser trained on Christopher. Christopher started to laugh again, then a manic look came into his eyes. "Yes, shoot me," he ordered the security guard. The security guard went from scared to confused. "I will," he warned. Christopher rolled his eyes in frustration. "Now," he snapped. He made to stand up, and thankfully the security guard was trigger-happy. The two electrical prongs shot forward and hit Christopher square in the chest. It was like a switch flipped. He felt his power roar to life. He turned back to Riley and slammed both his hands onto his chest and poured waves of electricity into him. A controlled amount. He didn't want to burn Riley alive. The security guard had dropped his taser and was backing away from Christopher. Only fear showed on his face, before he turned and ran. The sirens were right outside now. Christopher could hear the slamming of doors, then hammering feet. Riley shot awake with a start, taking in a huge gasp of air. Christopher fell backwards and reflexively scooted away. Riley looked down at himself, his shirt singed open through his chest, the skin bright red. He looked around confused and scared. Then his eyes fell on Christopher. Christopher didn't know what to expect, but pure aggression wasn't it. Riley made to dive for Christopher, murder clearly in his eyes. He had just wrapped his fists into Christopher's shirt when a police officer yelled, "Freeze now! Hands in the air!" Riley slowly released his grip and raised his hands. Christopher did the same. "What were you thinking?" George snapped. It was 10 o'clock that same morning. Christopher was sitting in his kitchen. His father was torn between wanting to hug his son and strangle him. His mother remained silent but was shaking her head, a look of disappointment. Christopher was tired after he was arrested and booked at the precinct. Christopher had been allowed to make one phone call. Thankfully, his father had answered on the second ring. Riley was currently at the hospital for his injuries. His goon squad had informed police that Christopher had attacked them, unprovoked, that he was a superpowered homo and needed to die. Christopher just wanted to go to his room, hide under his covers, and never come out. "Well," snapped his father. Christopher jerked. The kitchen lights flickered. This only seemed to frustrate his father more. "Stop doing that," he ordered. "I can't help it," said Christopher, his voice subdued. George's eyes flared with frustration. "George," Heidi said, "stop, this isn't getting us anywhere." George turned on his wife, but caught himself at the last second and took a deep, steadying breath. Heidi turned to her son, Christopher, her tone kinder than he expected. We will talk about this later. For now, go to your room. You are grounded until further notice. Christopher slid off the counter stool and made his way out of the kitchen. He was halfway up the stairs when he yelled out, "I'm sorry." He didn't wait to hear if they replied, just rushed into his room and shut the door. He didn't bother changing, just kicked off his shoes, placed his glasses on his nightstand, crawled under the covers, and fell asleep crying. "Who are you again?" demanded George as he reviewed the 2 business cards that had been handed to him. The first showed Melissa Gale and the second one Scott Colton, agents with the Salt Lake City order. Melissa smiled. "We're recovery agents." "Recovery agents?" asked Heidi from behind her husband. "Yes, your son's incident from 2 days ago has gotten our attention," said Scott. He didn't bother mentioning that it had gotten a lot of people's attention, thanks to the news and social media. "Well," said George as he handed back the cards, "you'll need to speak with our lawyer." He proceeded to shut the door, but an invisible force stopped him cold. Scott had his hand up and was pushing against the door with his mind. "Mr. and Mrs. Rook, we have been fully made aware of the circumstances around your son's situation," said Melissa, her smile unwavering, as she exuded her empathic gift upon the Rooks and slowly diminished both their hostility and apprehension. "My partner and I are only here to help." Heidi placed a tentative hand on her husband's shoulder. "It couldn't hurt to hear them out," she said. George still seemed hesitant, but it was clear he was more open to his wife's request. After a moment of consideration, he stepped back and allowed Melissa and Scott to step inside. The 2 of them were led into the living area, and they took a seat in a blue-cushioned love seat. "Christopher," called George, while his wife made her way into the kitchen. Christopher, who had stayed home the last 2 days and hadn't bothered to leave his room, other than for the bathroom, slowly made his way to the living room. He stopped short at the entrance as he took in Melissa and Scott. Melissa, still holding a relaxed smile, brightened at the sight of Christopher. Scott offered the standard bro nod of acknowledgement. "Hello, Christopher. It's a pleasure to meet you," Melissa said, her voice warm and welcoming. Christopher felt a wave of calmness come over him with her words. He looked at her questioningly as realization hit him, what she was doing. He thought about running, but realized he had already tried that, and it failed spectacularly. Had his father not had a lawyer, Christopher realized he would probably still be locked up, so he just accepted his fate and made his way into the living room, slumping into an armchair near the fireplace. "These 2 people would like to speak to you about the incident," said George. "They're recovery agents." "You're like me," said Christopher matter-of-factually. "Yes," said Scott, "we're gifted too." "Am I in a lot of trouble?" asked Christopher. "No," said Melissa. "The matter has been resolved entirely." "What?" said both George and Heidi, who was walking in with a tray of iced tea and cookies. Scott stood and took the tray from Heidi and placed it on the coffee table. Melissa laughed, a beautiful lilt to it. "Sorry, perhaps we should have led with that." George and Heidi shared a look. They made their way to their couch directly across from the love seat, their hands interlocked. "Who are you again?" asked George. "Recovery agents," said Melissa, once more laying Scott and her business card onto the coffee table before Christopher's parents. "We manage cases very similar to your son's. We research the incident and verify if the instigator was indeed gifted, and if so, if they had intentions to harm," said Scott. "He attacked me," said Christopher defensively. "His friends lied, He felt the wave of calmness wash over him again. He realized that his agitation was starting to cause the lights to flicker. By the time Melissa's empathic gift took hold, the television was now playing X-Men of all things as it turned on. George quickly grabbed the remote and turned the television off. "Old house, weird wiring, light and things do that," he said automatically. Melissa chuckled. "Mr. and Mrs. Rook, we are fully aware of your son's gift. Further, the bus station had security footage that recorded the whole incident." "Well, most of it. After the initial blast, the camera shut down," interjected Scott, who was sipping on his tea. His eyes lit up. "Impressive," he said. "Family recipe?" Heidi took a moment to respond, then an absent yes escaped her lips. "Let's get to the point, shall we?" said Melissa. "Christopher acted in self-defense. More importantly, he did so against another gifted—" "What?" interrupted Christopher as he shot out of his seat. "Riley's a gifted too?" Melissa and Scott shared a look. "Yes, well, he is now," amended Melissa. "It would seem his abilities are more newly developed." "It's common in high-stress situations or near-death experiences that abilities become activated," interjected Scott. "What can he do?" asked Christopher. "Super speed," said Melissa. "It would seem your electricity supercharged him." "So I made him sound barrier?" asked Christopher. Scott smiled at the mention of the fictional super speedster who got his powers from being struck by radioactive lightning. "Technically," he answered with a shrug. "Anyway," said Melissa, getting things back on track, "as this was an issue between Gifted and the fact that Riley is going to make a full recovery," she focused on Christopher, "the legalities have been fully resolved and the case has been dropped. However," Melissa shifted her expression to a more serious one, "Christopher will have to come with us to the Salt Lake City order, or whatever order you choose." "You're taking our son?" cried Heidi. George stood up and placed himself in front of Christopher and their two guests. "I think you two should leave," George's tone clearly not a request. "Mr. and Mrs. Rook, we have no intention of taking your son." Scott looked directly at Christopher. "But you need training. Besides, you've seen the news outlets. Everyone is fully aware of the incident and the part you played, Christopher." "It's unlikely he'll be allowed back at school," started Melissa. "So it's in Christopher's best interest. An order is quite ideal. He can continue his scholastic education and receive training for his ability. He'll also be among others like him, peers who understand what he's going through," continued Scott, returning his attention to Christopher. "You won't be seen as a danger or a weapon, just another special person among a sea of special people." A part of Christopher wanted to freak out, but another part, a bigger part of him, knew everything they were saying was true. He couldn't go back to school, not like this, and he'd been fighting for control of his power since he was 8. He was tired of being afraid, tired of losing control, tired of wondering what would happen if he hurt someone, and worse. He already had an answer to the last one. Kind of. But if it happened again, he may not be so lucky. He could start over. More than that, he may actually make actual friends and finally be able to stop being afraid. Christopher sighed. "Okay, I'll go." "What?" cried both his parents. Christopher held up his hands. "They're right. I can't go back to school. I can't stay locked in my room. And what happens when this happens again?" "It won't," said George as he wrapped his hands around his son's shoulders. "You don't know that, Dad," said Christopher. He turned a pleading look towards his mother. "Mom, I need to do this, please." Heidi, tears streaming down her face, seemed like she wanted to voice her own protests, but couldn't find the words, because it was all true. She simply nodded her head in the end. A sad smile crept across Christopher's face. He gave his dad a quick hug and headed back up to his room. "I'll start getting packed." Melissa and Scott shared another look. They had planned on giving the family time to make a choice, but it was clear Christopher had made up his mind. The two had anticipated this outcome, but had figured it would occur later. Still, they were not caught fully by surprise. Scott excused himself to adjust the travel plans. Melissa tried one of the cookies, her smile returning once more. "Lovely. If either of you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them." "Will he be safe?" Heidi asked, her face a mask of pure resolve. Melissa understood that look, strength in the face of adversity. Heidi Rook would have her breakdown after her son had left, but right now in this moment, Christopher's mother chose to be the pillar of strength her son needed. Melissa nodded yes. Heidi nodded back. "I'll go help Christopher get ready," and made her way to her son's room. "What about the other boy?" asked George, who slumped into the armchair. "He's being monitored closely at the hospital, but should be released by the end of the week. 2 other agents have been assigned to his case." "Will he be going to your order?" asked George, concern in his eyes. Melissa shrugged. "Perhaps. There are 4 major orders within the U.S. Washington, Utah, Texas, and New York, said Melissa. Perhaps he'll choose one of the other 3. George nodded, more out of acknowledging her words than believing them. George believed he was a good father. He wasn't perfect. God knows he had made mistakes, what parents hadn't. But, in the end, he failed to keep his son safe. George shook his head. If I asked him to stay, I would be condemning him or some other kid to death. Melissa moved to kneel before George, her hand covering his. Not at all. One bad incident doesn't erase all the good you and your wife have done, she said. It just means you're getting out of your depth, just like any parent with gifted kids. George nodded again, this time in agreement. Melissa nodded in return. You did good, Mr. Rook. Now it's the order's turn to continue to build on that. While packing, Christopher's father had verified who Melissa and Scott were through their business cards, internet searches, and a quick call to his lawyer who was aware of Christopher's abilities. Once he was certain his son was in good hands, he also gave his approval. An hour later, Christopher was in the back seat of Melissa and Scott's rental. After some tearful goodbyes, Christopher had finally pulled himself away and left with Melissa and Scott. He was to call his parents daily, and they would be coming out next weekend to make sure he was settled in okay. Christopher happily agreed. Running away hadn't worked, but Christopher hoped that running towards something new would give him a better chance.